Good evening, Bahamas. You're tuned into MB12 Weekend, broadcasting from Cable 12 Studios in Robinson Road. Coming up tonight, who was at fault for this week's Cabbage Beach protest? Why the Chamber of Commerce says everyone involved should take the blame. The Bahamas holds on to its Moodys rating. Why health authorities aren't letting their guard down about Zika. Aspiring news reporters try their hands behind the MB12 mic. Plus, as always, we check out this week's cutest kids and pets. I'm Paige McCartney. We've got those stories and more straight ahead on MB12 Weekend. Welcome once again to MB12. Bahamas Chamber of Commerce CEO Edison Sumner is hitting out at what he called reckless actions of those bridge protesters this past Monday afternoon. After access to Cabbage Beach was temporarily closed by the owners of the private strip of land, vendors blocked the Sidney Poitier Bridge. While Sumner said the matter could have been handled very differently, and he criticized protesters for their actions, police officers for theirs, and government for not addressing the matter before it became a problem. Here's Dana Smith with a report.
Sumner said although he understands the frustration of all those people who were protesting at the bridge on Monday afternoon, he believes their actions were reckless, explaining there are better ways to get your message across without being disruptive.
It is my view that the actions that I saw, I wasn't on the scene, but based on what we saw in the videos and the news reports, that I thought that the actions of the protesters in the way that the protests were done was rather reckless. We've seen before civil disobedience, right? Where persons decide, oh, I'm just not going to do, and we're going to have a gathering of like-minded people to go into certain place and we're going to demonstrate against a certain thing or for a certain thing. But when it becomes a case where people are laying across the streets, blocking public access to a public facility, parking cars across the streets, when you see the police getting involved and becoming very aggressive in the way they handle the situation, it doesn't bode well for anyone who was involved in that situation.
This past Monday, protesters chanted "Open Cabbage Beach" as they blocked access to the Sir Sidney Poitier Bridge with their cars and their bodies, with some physically lying and sitting in the road. Several protesters were restrained and arrested by police, prompting many to voice outrage over what they said were far too aggressive actions by officers.
The fact that, the persons have to resort to lying in the streets or to blocking bridge and access to get to Paradise Island isn't necessarily the best way to get your message out and to prove a point. And also the fact that you're impacting other people's businesses and other livelihoods from being able to get things done. What you're saying to me is that if I can't have my way, then the entire country's going to go to hell in a handbasket, and I'm going to be a part of it. And that is something that we cannot tolerate. Right? Some of us in this country are working too hard to cause the country to move in the right direction.
Sumner said in his view, the best way to get things resolved is in the boardroom. He advised protesters to reason things out and have a discussion with the necessary parties. And if that doesn't work, then you can resort to other measures. But ultimately, Sumner said it's not just the vendors whose actions he had a problem with. And he criticized police for using excessive force and government for not addressing the beach access problem.
In this instance, lot has to be cast on all sides of this divide. The government has to be culpable to a degree for allowing certain things to happen. The vendors who are there also has to be culpable for the way they handled it. I would have dealt with it a little differently. I would not have laid across the street in the bridge, and certainly I would not have responded to them the way the police did, which I thought, based on what we saw, seemed to have been excessive force in the way they handled the protesters.
Sumner said he hopes the relevant government agencies will address the matter quickly. And although he's happy the Prime Minister has stepped in, a permanent solution must be found.
I was pleased that the Prime Minister stepped in immediately to at least bring some temporary relief to the situation, but that's only temporary. What is going to be the case after this short reprieve ends? Are we going to find ourselves back to the place where we are, where the vendors again are complaining about access to the beach? This is not a new situation. We have seen this happen before, and there would have been time since the last time this occurred to have corrected the situation. Unfortunately, we didn't do it.
Reporting for NB12 Weekend, I'm Dana Smith.
Well, Democratic National Alliance leader Granville McCartney says that incident that erupted on Cabbage Beach earlier this week was just another example of the Christie administration failing to protect the well-being of Bahamians. He said the issue should have never gotten as far as it did, and the government is to blame. Here's Simone Davis.
Earlier this week, scores of members of the Cabbage Beach Vendors Association staged an emotional protest at the foot of the Sidney Poitier Bridge, preventing motorists from getting to Paradise Island for over an hour. This eventually led to a clash with police. Vendors were arrested and residents were outraged at how police handled the situation. But what made matters even worse was the government's handling of the issue, as Tourism Minister Obie Wilchcombe placed blame on the vendors, according to McCartney. The DNA leader said the government failed to stand its ground and essentially failed Bahamians, leaving them to fight for themselves.
The government failed to stand its ground, failed to look after the interests of Bahamian people like they do every day. They before the interests of the Chinese. They before the interests of other people, foreigners, but not the Bahamians.
McCartney said he believes the government knew exactly what was going to happen and simply did not inform the vendors or try to prevent it.
As the government must have known the conveyance, the contract. They must have given their approval for the sale of that property, that land, and so they knew. They knew that that property, the easement, the right-of-way, that our Bahamian people use day in and day out, that right-of-way where guests from other countries use day in and day out, they knew because they had to sign off to give the approval for a foreign company to purchase that property.
Following the protests, which led to the beach being fenced off, the government said Access Industries granted access for a period of time. Wilchcombe told our news team that the government is preparing a proposal, but did not reveal what the proposal entails. McCartney said the government isn't doing the vendors any favors because they should have been protected from the beginning, and the incident should have never happened.
By them saying we got an extension, they didn't do any favors for the Bahamian people. It should not have happened in the first place. Under a real government that really believes in Bahamians, and a real government that really would look after the interests of Bahamians, no person could come to the Bahamas and take up our access to the beach. You got to be crazy. That can't happen under a DNA government. That can't happen. The government failed to stand its ground.
Reporting for NB12 Weekend, I'm Simone Davis.
Well, international credit ratings agency Moodys has maintained the Bahamas' sovereign credit rating at Baa2 stable. Moodys wrote in a recent opinion released on Thursday that the credit strengths underpinning the Bahamas' Baa2 stable rating include a comparatively high level of gross domestic product per capita, a stable political system with high policy predictability, and low external debt ratios relative to peers. The main credit challenges include how long-term economic growth prospects, comparatively high government debt levels, and an economy heavily dependent on uncertain prospects for the offshore financial sector. The agency said there must be a reduction of liabilities from loss-making public sector corporations for the country's credit rating to be upgraded, among other things. You can pick up a copy of today's Nassau Guardian for further insight into the credit report. Well, the Bahamas has managed to remain Zika-free since the World Health Organization declared the virus a World Health emergency a month ago. But local health and safety officials say they've amped up their surveillance measures for what they call the likely event that it hits Bahamian shores. Zika has already spread to 22 countries and is linked to birth defects in children born to mothers who've been infected. Medical Officer Dr. Julia Smith and Nursing Officer Ingrid Seymour of the Department of Public Health Surveillance Unit say trained professionals are at each port of entry on the Capitol and major islands to keep an eye out for the potential carriers. The trick, they said, is that the Zika virus may only present noticeable symptoms in some infected people.
But at this time in the Bahamas, we have no cases of Zika virus, okay, or Zika infection. We are looking for it, okay? As with most of these viral illnesses that have broken out across the region, eventually we think it will get here. And so we're screening for it. We're not just screening for Zika, we're screening also for dengue and chikungunya.
Headaches, pink eye, or what we call conjunctivitis, but they don't have any discharge, joint pains, muscle pains, fatigue, just a feeling of not being unwell. And then you have persons who are light skinned. They tend to have a rash as well.
Zika has already been reported in neighboring countries, and local officials say it's inevitable the virus will soon make its way to the Bahamas. If and when that happens, Seymour says a contingency plan will be activated.
One of the main things that we do in the Department of Public Health, we act on suspicion. We don't wait for lab confirmation. And so if we have a client that comes into the clinic and we suspect that they may have any of the vector-borne illness, the first thing we do, we contact the Department of Environmental Health Services, and they start fogging immediately around that home and also in that neighborhood. Okay, and then we also do home visit to ensure that the client house reduce the amount of mosquitoes and ensure that their surroundings on the outside of their yard is not a breeding site. So these are some of the stuff we do, and we also educate them how to avoid breeding these mosquitoes, because this particular mosquito lives with us in our homes and around the home.
Zika is a vector-borne virus spread through the bite of an Aedes aegypti mosquito, an insect that makes its home in close proximity to the homes of humans. Smith says not to take for granted the measures you can take to protect yourself and your family from being infected.
The Aedes aegypti mosquito is that mosquito that lives in your house. Unlike Anopheles and some of the other mosquitoes that you will find out in the yard, etc., this one lives with humans. Yeah. And so you want to spray your home, okay? Right. But you don't want to stay in the area that you've just sprayed. You can go out for a little bit or something, let it settle, that kind of thing. Now, it is the female mosquito that bites, and it's the female mosquito that is predominantly found within the home. Now, she needs that blood meal in order to mature her eggs, okay? The male mosquitoes basically live out in the gardens, etc. So when environmental health is around fogging, etc., they're taking care of that lot. And also, and the adult factor. But also, we would recommend that you open your windows. Don't close your windows when you hear them out there spraying. Open your windows so that it can come in and, help take care of that as well.
Now, Brazil is the country hardest hit by the outbreak, with more than 1 million people becoming infected and more than 270 reported cases of microcephaly linked to the virus. Recent studies have also found that Zika can be transmitted sexually. Ahead of the 2016 Rio Olympic Games, local health officials say they have reached out to health officials in Brazil to ensure athletes and those traveling to spectate are properly prepared and protected.